My name is Marcy Foster. Welcome everyone here today. I am the director of the Office of Employment and Training here in the national office in Alexandria, Virginia at FNS. We in the national office work with regions to oversee the E&T program to make sure that USDA is really advancing consistent policy and guidance, implementing the laws passed by Congress, but also promoting innovation and fiscal stewardship of taxpayer funds to support E&T. In the national office, we have really the tremendous privilege of spearheading national projects like SNAP to Skills, which is bringing us here together today. More Than a Job, the National Forum. I'm looking at the names, and we know so many of you people from those different initiatives and those different conferences, and we welcome you again here today to learn more about E&T together. Today's webinar is just another example of the technical assistance we can offer through these partnerships. So thank you again for taking the time to be here. I think we can go to the next slide. I think we're just going to introduce some of our speakers. So that's just me. I'm Marcy. Loretta Robertson is also going to join us in a second and talk a little bit, give us a foundation of fiscal management as we embark on this three-part series. Loretta has been in OET since as long as I have. And has been working on E&T for longer than I have in Texas before coming to FNS. We'll also be joined by Mathematica. So today's speakers, John McKay, Gretchen Rao, and Elizabeth Brown, who are going to be doing a lot of the facilitation and also content for today's webinar. And we are really grateful to partner with them, with Mathematica, and continue the SNAP to Skills partnership that we've had over the last couple of years. But I think now, we'll go to the next slide. So our Secretary Rollins, who has been at USDA for just over a year, has laid out some key priorities for federal nutrition programs that are pertinent to E&T. So we have three here on the slides, but there are many more priorities. And honestly, I think E&T touches on all of them. So we're going to talk about three here today. Of course, we are here to ensure that people who can work have access to the skills and education that they need to get a better job. And we are always stewards of innovation and modernization. I think SNAP E&T is really one of the most exciting parts of SNAP. Of course, I would hope I would think that, because it is constantly changing. And that's because the needs of participants are themselves constantly changing. The labor market needs, the state needs, SNAP E&T comes at the intersection of all of those. So we want to make sure this program remains relevant for the people it is supposed to serve. And you, of course, are operators of SNAP and SNAP E&T, so you know this. You know it's designed to be flexible, and that is its greatest strength. That SNAP E&T can help a participant from wherever they are to wherever they want to go. And that flexibility, ironically, is one of the things that makes fiscal stewardship the most challenging. So it makes it complicated from a fiscal standpoint, right? So it's a flexible program, but you need to know those basic fundamentals of fiscal management and how they apply to the flexibility that we can provide in E&T. So really congratulations and kudos to you all for trying to work with us to disentangle these complex policies. But I think we've laid it out in a way that gives you a foundation and gives you some tools to think about fiscal management holistically as part of the E&T program and not just in isolation. And I also wanted to mention that our fiscal, this webinar series is about fiscal management, and it's about program integrity, right? So we want to make sure that taxpayer dollars are used responsibly, but it's also as much about improving the program and making sure that we are giving you the tools to move forward confidently, to build bigger, better programs, develop new partnerships so that you can sort of move forward confidently and feel like you're moving in the right direction while also being fiscal stewards. So it's as much about program improvement as it is about integrity. So the last thing I wanted to say before I disappear off of the screen is that, of course, we are partnering with Mathematica and grateful for that partnership. But I'm going to give a huge shout out to Loretta Robertson, who has been our fiscal getting our fiscal house in order ever since her first day here in 2014. Over more than 11 years in FNS, like none of this concept of fiscal management and the frameworks that we're providing here today would have been possible without that leadership and like literally all of the work for all of the years leading up to it. So I would give a big shout out to her and thanks for that. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Loretta, who will take over the next part of our presentation. Thank you for joining us.
So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, in case you're on the West Coast. Thank you, Marcy. So I'm just going to kind of, again, level set or place a foundation about SNAP employment and training for those in the audience who may be new to SNAP employment and training, or maybe as a refresher. So, the SNAP employment and training program initiative was actually established under the Food Nutrition Act of 1985. So way back in 1985. With the goal of helping participants gain the skills, training, or work experience needed to secure and maintain employment. So that's been the goal and the purpose of SNAP E&T since the beginning of the program. Although the core purpose of SNAP E&T remains unchanged, Congress did reinforce its importance in 2018 by clarifying that the purpose of SNAP includes supports for low-income adults in obtaining employment and increasing their earnings. Those earnings, those gains in employment and earnings, coupled with program benefits, with SNAP benefits, are to enhance the eligible household's purchasing power to improve their ability to obtain a more nutritious diet. So again, E&T is very integral and very critical to the overall SNAP program as a whole. As Marcy mentioned, all states must operate an employment and training program and submit an annual plan with an operating budget for that program. But the states have considerable flexibility in designing that program. It should address the local labor market needs and support participant progress toward that end goal of obtaining employment, retaining employment, increasing their earnings. And so the SNAP E&T program can include, a variety of components, and here are the components listed. Anything from supervised job search to education, vocational training, and work-based learning. So again, the states have a lot of flexibility, and therein lies the problem with then effectively managing the fiscal operation of the House. So with that, I am now going to turn it over to John McKay to lead us into the discussion. So.
Thanks so much, Loretta, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is John McKay, and I am a senior consultant here at Mathematica, and also have the privilege of leading the SNAP to Skills project in partnership with OET. I want to introduce our topic a little bit more for you and start with the goals that we have for this hour. The first is that we're going to introduce a new fiscal life cycle to you. And so our hope is that you walk away from this session with a clear understanding of what that is and how it can be useful to you. Our hope is that it's not just another framework or life cycle that sort of lives out there in a document, but that it feels practical and useful. And I'll speak in a minute about the potential benefits of that for you all as state practitioners. The second is that we hope you also walk away with a concrete area for improvement or growth or strengthening as it relates to your state's current financial management practices. Again, this is not just about sharing some information. We really want to inspire your thinking about where you can strengthen your current practices, have better financial and fiscal management in your state agencies, and in collaboration between program policy and fiscal staff within your state agencies. And so those are our goals today. We're going to do kind of two key things. One is we're first going to spend some time sharing with you in a presentation, and then we're going to have some time for breakout rooms where you will join alongside peers in other states and have a chance to reflect and react to what you've heard, as well as exchange ideas and hear how other states are dealing with some of these same issues and processes. So look forward to that. I want to say a few words about why we would have a fiscal life cycle, why introduce something like this. And I think there are three key benefits. The first is that a fiscal life cycle provides shared language. This is something that can get really complicated and complex to talk about particularly when you're switching from a sort of program or policy-minded position to a fiscal or financial position. We want to make sure that there is a common language for people to use within and across states, as well as between states, regions, and the federal government. That this shared language can help collaboration occur more seamlessly because we know what we're talking about. With so many technical terms and jargon at play, this can help to simplify and know what we're doing as we move through the process. We also think it's important for states to think about using this within their own partnerships. So with intermediaries and with your network of providers, this is a great way to bring people together around using the same terms and language. The second benefit we think is that it provides a systematic approach. Again, fiscal management and SNAP E&T is complex. And so this provides a way to be more intentional and thorough in the way that states consistently adapt and replicate fiscal management practices for the SNAP E&T program. It's not meant to be a one-size-fits-all or a straitjacket, but there are certainly common and consistent elements that we would want to see across any state. And so this life cycle is designed to provide those guardrails for being systematic. And lastly, but very importantly, we want to be data-driven in the way that we approach fiscal management. And so this life cycle is designed to help each of you think about how data can be used at each and every stage of the process, whether you're planning, creating the budget, you're tracking your spending as you go throughout the year, you're making adjustments, you're reporting that data back to USDA, or you're talking with intermediaries and providers. At every step of the process, we want data to play a central role, and we'll talk a little bit about how that can happen today, as well as some of our future webinar sessions that are coming up in the next few weeks. So here is a very brief introduction to the fiscal life cycle. You can see it depicted on the screen here. We want to emphasize just a couple of things, and then today's webinar is going to walk through each of these stages to give some concreteness to what does this mean and what can it look like in practice, sharing some high-level strategies with you. Just a note that we're not going to be able to cover everything in detail today, which is why this is a webinar series. And so we do hope that you'll join us again next week, where we'll dive more deeply into the plan and budget stages, as well as on May 6th, when we'll dive more deeply into spending and tracking, as well as financial monitoring. But as you can see from the slide, the life cycle really begins and ends with planning. Planning is a process that occurs formally at certain parts of the year in SNAP E&T, but it's also something that is routinely informed by what's happening on both the program and the fiscal side of operations. Planning is really about the design of the program, and when we think about it in the context of the fiscal management of the program, we want to make sure that planning is not detached from how the budget is shaping up. What are the resources that we have available, and how are we going to operationalize those resources to accomplish the design of our program, which very much leads into budgeting, right? That the plan should be well connected, thought through, and operationalized by the budget, which is getting at what the estimated costs are to operate the program. That then leads into the ongoing spending of resources, which is understanding what program operations are actually costing as participants actually engage and participate in the program. Tracking is closely related to that, which is understanding how actual costs compare to the estimates, having a process in place for ensuring that we know exactly how those resources are being spent, whether they are allowable, and how they are being allocated to SNAP E&T, particularly when costs are being shared across multiple programs. Reporting is, of course, the process of summarizing what the program budget expenditures and costs actually were, and then sharing that with USDA, as well as potentially with state partners, intermediaries, providers, and other interest holders within your state. Fiscal and financial monitoring is something that should be happening throughout this entire process. And the life cycle is supported by robust procedures for how you are ensuring a two-way flow of data and information between your state program and fiscal people, as well as with your providers and intermediaries, and in partnership with the regional offices and USDA at the federal level. So with that, I am going to take just a moment here to get some quick reactions from you all. Our host is going to open up a first poll. And what I'd like for you to do is just kind of at first blush, looking at this fiscal life cycle, which of those stages that I just described for you, do you feel like your state is managing well? Take just another 10 seconds here. We're over 2/3 of you having participated, which is great. Right, and let's go ahead and publish the results of that poll, which indicates that there's a pretty even split here. Spending and tracking edges out the other stages of the life cycle. Ongoing financial monitoring is the one that came up short. And so we still would like to ask this next question to get a sense from you all. At first blush, which stage would you say that your state experiences the greatest challenge or difficulty in managing? So we're going to push out a second poll question to you here. Which of those stages, again, just at first blush, would you say is the biggest challenge? We'll go ahead and publish those poll results. And it looks like here, spending and tracking, interestingly, many of you, a plurality, I guess, said was the greatest challenge alongside ongoing financial monitoring. So our hope is that today we'll have a chance to start the conversation around how we can strengthen our practices in each of these areas. And we do hope you'll join us for the second and third webinars in this series, which will dig into the spending and tracking and financial monitoring piece in particular. With that, I am going to go ahead and move us into the presentation portion, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Gretchen Rao.
Thanks, John. So let's start, oh, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start by talking about the plan stage. And in the figure, you can see that it starts outside of the fiscal life cycle and flows into it. And that really represents the work that you're all doing each year, generally during your state plan development, to revisit your program and determine what's working well and what could be improved for the upcoming year. So the annual planning process is broader than just the fiscal elements of the program, and it should involve a more strategic design and choices about how the program will advance your mission and vision for the overall for the next year. However, the planning process should be grounded in an accurate understanding of the fiscal state of the program, including the sources of funding available to operate the program. So understanding the current and recent years' fiscal trends across funding streams, partners, providers in some states, counties, is really key to helping you make strategic, informed, and intentional decisions about all aspects of your program. Next slide. So the plan stage should include a series of planning activities with staff from the SNAP E&T program office, obviously, but also including your fiscal staff, your contracts and procurement staff, likely data and reporting staff should be included in these conversations as well. And then your partners and providers externally who are providing your direct service delivery too. Every person doesn't need to be involved in every aspect of the planning, but you should be including the different perspectives of these staff at various points in the process so that you really can understand the full picture that contributed to your prior year's outcomes and fiscal conditions, as well as any changes that might be on the horizon that you need to consider as you move forward into the next year. And so data is also at the foundation of the plan stage. You should gather fiscal and program data from the current year that you're in, that you're planning for the next year, as well as some of the recent prior years, so that you can look at trends in the data for making some of your decisions. These data are going to come from a variety of sources, like your SNAP eligibility system, your SNAP E&T participation data, provider reports, and then obviously your fiscal systems as well. And these data will really help you assess if the program is meeting its goals, and also if your partners and providers are meeting their contractual kind of outcomes that you've negotiated with them. And then all of that should be informing your priorities for the upcoming year. So the data that you review, the meetings that you have, and then the strategic planning that you're developing will help you identify realistic budget targets for the next fiscal year based on the priorities that you're identifying. And then you also would want to be including your providers and partners in some of this assessment once you've kind of identified what your priorities are. You'd want to review and revise contracts potentially just to make sure that it's all aligning with where your priorities are going, and then it all fits into your potential budget targets and available funding for the next year. So all of the decisions that you make in the plan stage have financial implications for your program. The budget stage focuses on understanding what the estimated costs are to operate the program that you've envisioned in the plan stage. So obviously all states have to develop, as Loretta said, an operating budget as part of the state plan. But beyond just meeting that federal requirement, the budget itself is also a really important tool for states and all of you to use to identify the type and amount of funds needed for your program, how they're going to be spent, and then ultimately for monitoring the program for ongoing monitoring as well. For budgeting, you want to use the prior year's budget as a starting baseline, but you do need to make adjustments to that based on new design decisions, changes to your priorities, and the reality of how many people can be served and have been served in the past as well. So you should be looking at actual costs, which you may need to get from your fiscal staff from the prior years, as well as actual numbers served in the prior years for defining your upcoming budget. So not just what you intended, what you budgeted for last time, or what you intended, how many people you intended to serve, but the actual numbers. So for example, if you find out that you actually underspent your budget in the prior year, or you weren't serving as many participants as you expected, then you want to be making changes to your upcoming budget, assuming you're not making any major changes to your program overall. And as part of the process, you'll want to also look at the data at the provider level so that you can work with your providers to vet and define and refine the budget, and again, potentially contracts too if needed. Next slide. So to finalize the upcoming budget, you should work closely with your financial staff at the state level to provide, again, the actual costs, not just the budgeted costs of the program for the prior years. You also will have the funding targets from FNS to guide your overall budget estimates that you're developing. And then using this, you can identify parameters for each provider to develop their own budgets to contribute to your overall budget to make sure you're on track. Best practice is to provide guidance and templates to your providers, and this will really help reduce confusion and just ultimately the back and forth that has to happen in developing those budgets with your providers. And then when you get the provider budgets, you'll also want to review them to determine that the costs that are included are reasonable, necessary, and allocable for the services. And then also, again, when you compare, you'll want to kind of compare to the prior years, when possible, if that provider has been around, and also look at the number of participants that they plan to serve and just make sure that that's reasonable based on sort of their historical data as well. And also the number of people that you expect to refer to those providers in the upcoming years. You may need to have some more conversations before those budgets are actually final and before you're able to consolidate and then submit them to FNS. And then in the next phase, go to the next slide, of the life cycle, it's the spend stage. So after you've budgeted you need a process for documenting the spending to understand the actual costs of operating the program, and also to ensure that only costs for SNAP E&T are allocated and reimbursed by the program as well. So typically, the SNAP E&T program includes both federal and non-federal funds. So therefore, it's really important that your fiscal management system has kind of an efficient workflow for tracking the spending by the different funding streams, and also capturing the appropriate documentation that you need for the program. And states also need to develop clear processes for receiving monthly invoices from providers and partners for the expenditures, and also a process for seeking reimbursements from the federal government so that all of the costs can be reimbursed, and also partners and providers can get paid in a timely manner. Most states obviously have these in place already, systems in place. So it's important for the SNAP E&T program staff to be working internally with your fiscal staff to coordinate and collaborate and make sure that the E&T staff know what their role is, their responsibility is in approving invoices, and what the timeline is, and then also working with your providers to ensure that they have clear expectations for invoicing and what the timelines look like for reimbursement as well. And so then in this, okay, sorry, yeah, on the next slide. In the spend stage, you'll need to document expenditures by funding source and ensure that those costs are aligned with the requirements of each of the funding sources. And so states should or need to develop procedures to ensure that they receive documentation from their partners and providers that are going to allow them to confirm costs actually comply with all of those requirements. And in particular, it's important to differentiate, as I mentioned before, between federal and non-federal funds. Other considerations for documenting the spending and just thinking about are what costs are exclusively covered by SNAP E&T services or for SNAP E&T services in whole, what costs are shared between SNAP E&T, the SNAP E&T program, and then other programs. Other considerations are what costs are going to vary depending on the number of SNAP E&T participants that you're serving. So that could be things like participant reimbursements or transportation costs. That's going to vary, again, depending by how many people are coming into the program, whereas there are other costs that do not vary based on participants, and that could be things like rent at a facility that's likely not to vary. So all of the data that you're collecting under the spend stage can be used for monitoring your program, which is what Elizabeth is going to talk about in the next stage of the life cycle.
Great, thanks, Gretchen. All right, so as Gretchen mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the track stage of the life cycle. And regular tracking really allows you to identify and address issues in real time. It gives you an up-to-date information and can promote fiscal accountability and accurate reporting. So as you see here on this slide, we've got the key question for this stage: how do the actual costs compare to the estimated cost? So really in the tracking stage, this is a life cycle, so things are linked. So it's really linked to the previous stage, and that you need to track what you've spent, right? It's important to compare what you've actually spent to your budget. So then again, going back to that budget stage, so you can determine how frequently you should track. And this can be based on, the type of expense or the services. For example, you may want to track certain providers monthly. If you've got providers who are giving you monthly invoices and get a sense of what are they spending. Others, you may have a different cadence. So it really depends on the types of services that they're providing. Tracking expenses against the budget will help you quickly identify if your providers are under or overspending, like what Gretchen talked about, and allow you to adjust throughout the year. In addition, tracking invoices and other documentation can really help you keep track of progress and make sure that you have what you need. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, great. So on this slide, we provide some practical tips for the types of things to track. And again, there are many things that you could be tracking. So this is not by any means an exhaustive list, but just some ideas. And really, again, this is tracking the spending compared to the budget. So you can do this in a few different ways. You may want to track spending overall, so you know how much your program is spending at any one point in time. You can track by each provider, so that you can identify providers that may be spending more than you anticipated, or those that are not spending as fast, or maybe not as much as you expected. You can also track by county, so look at one county compared to the other, and how are they how are they spending compared to what you thought they would be spending. You may also want to look by component. So there are many slices of the pie that will allow you to manage your program. You may also want to track cost per participant. So this is looking at maybe by the program overall, or by activity. So how much is a certain activity costing, or by looking at components in different ways. So you may want to look at components by providers, or maybe you have goals for certain components. So there are many, many different ways in which you can track your spending. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we talked about a lot of concepts, lots of different ways to track. So now we want to actually break it down, and we've got some numbers in this table, and go through some examples of how we might think about our tracking of our budget compared to our expenditures with our participants. So John, if you can go to the next animation. Perfect. All right. So we've got this example here on the screen, and we've got our overall budget, our overall expenditures, and then we've got two of our providers. Now, these aren't all of our providers, but just for the sake of this table being way too large, we've got two. So in this example, the state has spent about 63% of the budget. So if you're looking at it at a point in time, you're like, wow, we've spent 63% of our budget. But if you want to get more refined into what is driving that 63%, we could look by provider. So by looking at these numbers, we see that provider A has spent about 90% of their budget, and provider B has only spent 55% of their budget. So, looking at these differences when you're doing your analysis, these may prompt some questions. So, why is one provider spending faster? Is this aligned with participant outcomes or our expectations of what we think this should be? So if you, for example, if you expect the providers to be spending at the same rate, it would be important to reach out to provider B to understand what could be causing the underspending. Or if you're like, you know what, I would expect them to be different, then maybe this makes sense to you. So it's really important to look into those numbers, not just the program overall, but then look at it by provider. All right, let's go to the next idea. Thanks. Next, we want to look at the per participant cost. So for this, we would look at what we spent compared to the number of participants that we've served. So in this example, provider A has a much lower per participant cost than provider B. So when we're thinking about this, it could be based on the types of components or services that are offered by provider A compared to provider B, and maybe what we would expect the cost per participant to be different. Or, if the providers offer the same type of service, it's the same duration that you'd expect participants to be in, and you say, you know what, I would really think they should be about the same. This is when you may want to explore what's driving those differences. So this, brings in your knowledge of what the providers are offering, the services that participants are getting, the length of those services, and have a good sense of like, okay, should these be about the same? Should they be different? Our next set of numbers looks at the per participant cost by component. So this allows you to compare the program overall next to numbers for the different providers. And here we see, let's just look at vocational training, and it's more expensive for provider B than provider A. So it could be that, again, provider B is offering more intensive training, or perhaps these numbers are not what you expected, and then maybe it's worth that conversation again. So the key here is not just, collecting all these data, but really to identify trends, to then ask your questions, to make informed decisions in real time. And this level of tracking helps you catch issues early, make adjustments, and then, before you get down the road, you can look at what's going on. All right, next slide. Okay. So the next stage is the report stage. And this is where we're really bringing everything together and trying to provide a clear summary of what your program's budgets and actual expenditures are. States are responsible for compiling and validating data across providers. Maybe you have intermediaries, maybe you have counties that are different. So it's really to ensure accuracy across all the contributors to your reporting. This is also when you will submit required federal fiscal forms. This includes the FNS 366A and the SF 425, FNS 778. And the 366A is an annual budget projection form that state agencies submit to FNS. It requires quarterly projections of program costs for the upcoming federal fiscal year, along with some assumptions, and it's used to develop the estimates. The SF 425, 778, is a financial reporting form of SNAP program costs. State agencies submit it quarterly to report actual expenditures. And this form is often submitted by the financial team of SNAP agencies. And it's really essential for understanding program expenditures that are being reported to FNS. All right, next slide. Okay, so in practice, the report stage is about making sure that your data are accurate, that they're consistent, that they're ready for submission. For example, your operating budget that we've discussed, your FNS 366A form, your actual expenditures should all be consistent with one another. This should tell the story, right? And validation, having a validation process will help you identify and address any discrepancies in real time before one of these reports is submitted. If there are discrepancies, for example, there's a huge difference between your projected and your actual cost, and you think they should be more aligned, this is where you could sort of explore what those issues might be before you submit your report. Accurate reporting is important because it really does support making sure that your funding levels are appropriate, that that you have oversight and strong collaboration between the program and fiscal staff. It also supports better decision making, as Gretchen mentioned, because the data you submit here really does feed back into that planning and budgeting. So again, this is a cycle, and they feed back into that planning to make sure that for the next year, you know how you're spending your funds, what you're projecting, and that you can operate an effective SNAP E&T program. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the slide that in that poll I was like, let's talk about ongoing fiscal monitoring. So you'll notice in the fiscal life cycle in the graphic, ongoing fiscal monitoring is not a separate stage. It is in the middle. And the reason that this is in the middle is because it happens continuously across every stage of the fiscal life cycle. It means that you're regularly checking how funds are being used, not just at reporting time. This is throughout planning, budgeting, spending, tracking. So not just reporting, but you're constantly checking how funds are being spent. The goal here is really to make sure that SNAP E&T funds are used appropriately, that they are aligned with your program goals and consistent with the federal requirements. In practice, this includes, conducting financial management evaluations, using reconciliation processes to adjust your plans and your contracts. It can also mean, routinely, like setting up a cadence of reviewing spending and identifying issues early. And this could be underspending, overspending, or delays in invoicing. So any part of that process that you are regularly assessing, is it where you want it to be? Regular communication, of course, with your providers, your intermediaries, or your counties, it's critical to making this work. And these conversations can really help you understand what's driving the spending patterns, allow you to address any challenges before they become bigger issues. And ongoing monitoring really gives you the ability to make real-time decisions. So you may need to shift funds between providers, update your contracts with providers, refine your program operations throughout the year. So this really helps you stay accountable, hopefully avoid surprises, and make the most effective use of your SNAP E&T funds. So that finishes our description of the SNAP E&T lifecycle, and now I'm going to pass it back to John.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. So we're going to stop there in terms of introducing content for today, and we want to give some space for discussion and reaction and conversation to occur. And so we have some breakouts set up where, again, you'll just have a chance to talk to and hear from other representatives from other states. And we just want to encourage you to think about what resonated from the fiscal life cycle introduction today. What are some things your state is already doing that you heard about today that sort of reinforced and affirmed this is working well? Where do you see opportunities to take a more intentional and a systematic approach to financial management? And is there something specific that you feel like is coming up for you to explore further or take a next step with? So we'll have roughly 15 minutes in these open discussion groups, and we will then come back to this main room just to close out and talk about what's next. So we are going to open the rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. If you were like my group, you got cut off mid-conversation. So we wish we had a little more time today to have the conversation, but I think there were some good ideas that started to percolate. And so we just invite you to come on back for more. I wanted to take just a minute to hear from folks in this larger group, kind of what was something you felt like you learned or that piqued your interest today. And so if you want to share that here in the poll that just popped up on your screen, you can do that. It'd be great to see kind of what's percolating for folks. And as you're doing that, I want to just let you know about some upcoming resources. One is that, particularly related to what we talked about today, we have a fiscal management toolkit for SNAP employment and training that is forthcoming. This is a resource that has not existed before, and it really lays out the fiscal life cycle that we talked through today in a lot more detail and provides practical guidance and suggestions and tips on best practices to ensure that you're doing fiscal management in a sound, consistent, systematic way. So stay tuned for that. That should be available soon, and we will certainly let you know when it is available on the FNS website. A couple of other resources are one on cost allocation, both a sort of tool that outlines some guidance as well as an infographic that takes this somewhat complex idea and kind of breaks it down into a visual, as well as some planning and budgeting worksheets, actual analysis tools that we hope are fairly simple and straightforward, that would allow you to do some of what Elizabeth talked through today, of comparing expenditure to budget in a bunch of different ways, both at the state level and at the provider or county level. And so we hope that those resources will also be helpful to you. I think that's a good opportunity to just reaffirm that we will be talking about those topics more in depth at next week's webinar, as well as the one on May 6th. So if you're not already registered for those, please do plan to join us where we'll talk more and share about those topics. Let's go ahead and share out the poll results for those of you that have already answered it. And we can just see what has been percolating for people. I also want to note that we're going to put a link in the chat to an evaluation, and we would love just your quick feedback about what today's webinar was like for you and what worked well and what we could do to improve it. So you should see that show up in the chat here. Here it is. My colleague Sarah just posted it. So if you wouldn't mind, just take 30 seconds now as we close out today and share your feedback with us. Again, it was our real pleasure to have you, and we hope that we will get to see you again next week for part 2 of this conversation, where we'll be talking about planning and budgeting. And we will share the recording as well as the slides with everybody who registered from today. So with that, we thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.